Page 75. A stubborn legend persists in the archipelago to the effect that the camps were thought up by Frankel. It seems to me that this fanciful idea, both unpatriotic and even insulting to the authorities, is quite sufficiently refuted by the preceding chapters. Even with the meager means at our disposal, we succeeded, I hope, in showing the birth of the camps for the repression and labor back in 1918, without any Frankel whatsoever. They arrived at the conclusion that the prisoners must not waste their time in moral contemplation. The purpose of Soviet corrective labor policy is not at all individual correction, it is traditional meaning. In its traditional meaning, unquote, but must labor, and at the same time must be given very severe, almost unbearable work norms to achieve. Long before Frankel, they already used to say, correction through labor. As far back as Eichmann's, they already understood this to mean destruction through labor. Yes, and not even contemporary dialectical thought processes were needed to arrive at the idea of using prisoners sentenced to heavy labor for work in remote, little settled areas. Back in 1890, in the Ministry of Railroads, they decided to use hard labor exiles in the Amur region for laying rails on the railroad. They simply forced the hard labor prisoners to work, while exiles and deportees were permitted to work laying rails, and in return got a reduction in their terms by 1/3 or 1/2. However, they preferred to get rid of their whole team all at once, by escape. And from 1896 to 1900, work on the Lake Baikal shoreline sector of the Trans-Siberian was carried out by 1,500 hard labor prisoners and 2,500 compulsory resettled exiles. Therefore, the idea was by no means new and not founded on progressive educational theories. Nonetheless, Frankel really did become the nerve of the archipelago. He was one of those successful men of action whom history hungrily awaits and summons to itself. It would seem that there had been camps even before Frankel, but they had not taken on that final unified form which savors of perfection. Every genuine prophet arrives when he is most acutely needed. Frankel arrived in the archipelago just at the beginning of the Metastesizes. Naftali Aronovich Frankel, a Turkish Jew, was born in Constantinople. He graduated from the Commercial Institute there and took up the timber trade. He founded a firm in Mariupol and soon became a millionaire, the timber king of the Black Sea. He had his own steamers, and he even published his own newspaper on Mariupol called the Kopek, whose function was to slander and persecute his competitors. During World War I, Frankel conducted some speculative arms deals through Gallipoli. In 1916, sensing the pending storm in Russia, he transferred his capital to Turkey even before the February Revolution, and in 1917 he himself went to Constantinople in pursuit of it, and he could have gone on living the sweetly exciting life of a merchant, and he would have known no bitter grief and would not have turned into a legend. But some fateful force beckoned him to the Red Power. The rumor is unverified that in those years In Constantinople, he became the resident Soviet intelligence agent, perhaps for ideological reasons, for it is otherwise difficult to see why he needed it. But it is in fact that in the new economic policy years, he came to the USSR, and here, on secret instructions from the GPU, the security police, created, as if in his own name, a black market for the purchase of valuables in gold in return for Soviet paper rubles. This was a predecessor of the gold drive of the GPU and Torgsin. Business operators and manipulators remembered him very well, indeed from the old days. They trusted him, and the gold flowed into the coffers of the GPU. The purchasing operation came to an end, and in gratitude the GPU arrested him. Every wise man has enough of the simpleton in him. However, the inexhaustible and holding no grudges, Frankel, while still in the Lubyanka or on the way to Solovki, sent some sort of declaration to the top. Finding himself in a trap, he evidently decided to make a business analysis of his life too. He was brought to Solovki in 1927, but was immediately separated from the prisoner transport, settled into a stone booth outside the bounds of the monastery itself, provided with an orderly to look after him, and permitted free movement about the island. We have already recalled that he became the chief of the economics section, the privilege of a free man, and expressed his famous thesis about using up the prisoner in the first 3 months. In 1928, he was already in Chem. There he created a profitable auxiliary enterprise. He brought to Chem the leather which had been accumulated by the monks for decades and had been lying uselessly in the monastery warehouses. He recruited furriers and shoemakers from among the prisoners and supplied fashionable, high-quality footwear and leather goods directly to a special shop on Kuznetsky Most in Moscow. The GPU ran it and took the receipts, but the ladies who bought their shoes there didn't know that, and when they themselves were hauled off to the archipelago not long after, they never even remembered the shop. One day in 1929, an airplane flew from Moscow to get Frankel and brought him to an appointment with Stalin. The best friend of prisoners and the best friend of the Czechs talked interestedly with Frankel for 3 hours. The stenographic report of this conversation will never become public. There simply was none, but it is clear that Frankel unfolded before the father of the people's dazzling prospects for constructing socialism through the use of prison labor. Much of the geography of the archipelago being described in the aftermath by my obedient pen, he sketched in bold strokes on the map of the Soviet Union to the accompaniment of the puffing of his interlocutor's pipe. It was Frankel in person, apparently on that precise occasion, who proposed the all-embracing system of classification of camp prisoners into groups A, B, C, and D, which left no leeway to the camp chiefs and even lesser to the prisoner, everyone not engaged in providing essential services for the camp. B, not verified as being ill. C, and not undergoing correction in a punishment cell. D, must drag his workload. A, every day of his sentence. The world history of hard labor has never known such universality. It was Frankel in person, and in this very conversation, who proposed renouncing the reactionary system of equality in feeding prisoners, who outlined a unified a unified system of redistribution of the meager food supplies for the whole archipelago, a scale for bread rations and a scale for hot food rations, which was adopted by him from the Eskimos. A fish on a pole held out in front of the running dog team. In addition, he proposed time of sentence and release ahead of term as rewards for good work, but in this respect, he was hardly original. For 1890, in Sakhalin, hard labor, Chekhov discovered both the one and the other. In all probability, the first experimental field was set up here too, the great Belomorostroy, the White Sea-Baltic Canal construction project, to which the enterprising foreign exchange and gold speculator would soon be appointed, not as chief of construction nor as chief of camp either, but to the post especially dreamed up for him as works chief, the chief overseer of the labor battle. And here he is himself. Illustration number 11. Naftali Frankel. We have Aaron Stoltz, Jakob Rappaport, Matvey Berman, Lazar Kogan, Genrich Yagoda. Always amazed by their faces for some reason. You know? It is evident from his face how he brimmed with a vicious, human-hating animus. In the book on the Belomor Canal, the White Sea-Baltic Canal, wishing to laud Frankel, one Soviet writer would soon describe him thus, quote, the eyes of an interrogator and a prosecutor, the lips of a skeptic and a satirist, a man with enormous love of power and pride, for whom the main thing is unlimited power. It is necessary for him to be feared, then let him be feared, if it is. He spoke harshly to the engineers, attempting to humiliate them, unquote. This last phrase seems to us a keystone to both the character and biography of Frankel. By the start of Belomorostroy, Frankel had been freed. For construction of the Belomor Canal, he received the Order of Lenin and was named Chief of Construction of Bamlag, the Baikal-Amur Main Line Railroad, which was a name out of the future. While in the 30s, Bamlag was put to work adding a second track to the Trans-Siberian main line of those sectors where there was none. And this was by no means the last item in the career of Naftali Frankel, but it is more relevant to complete the account in the next chapter. Thank you for listening. Have a nice day.